Other news now and developing tonight. We are learning more about the woman who was shot and killed on Indy's southeast side.
This happened Sunday afternoon at a home near Stop 11 and Shelbyville Roads. Our Ashton Hackman explains why court records show the woman may have been trying to leave an abusive marriage.
Police lights drown out the Christmas lights hanging from this home on Meadow Bend Lane. Officers filled the street Sunday afternoon. In the driveway, they found 44-year-old Jerri Mains shot. She died at the hospital.
This is a tragic incident, and this family is going to be impacted for the rest of their lives.
Court documents say 3 children inside the home at the time saw and heard the shooting. With their help, police quickly located and later arrested their father, who police say pulled the trigger. Court documents show detectives found a gun in the man's car, matching shell casings at the scene.
Violence of any kind is never a solution. It doesn't solve a problem, it doesn't resolve the conflict, and it comes with a lifetime of consequences.
Prosecutors have not yet officially charged the man arrested for the killings, who's sitting in jail here in Marion County, but a protection order filed Christmas Day by Mains alleges months of abuse against her husband. The court filing describes abuse that was sometimes physical, escalating just days before the shooting. Mains wrote that her husband threatened to kill her and himself because she wanted a divorce.
We are seeing an increase of domestic violence here in the city, and it continues to be women.
Daniette Smith leads Indy Champions, which streamlines help to victims and survivors of domestic abuse in Marion County. She says Mains was in a window most dangerous to abuse victims.
We know that leaving a domestic violence situation is the most dangerous, but when there's a level of, whether it's marriage or children or pregnancy, it heightens that danger even further.
A danger ending in tragedy for a family now left with grief and questions. On Indy's southeast side, Ashton Hackman, 13 News.
This story begins in a place that was supposed to be safe. A home, a driveway, for children inside. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in Indianapolis, December 28th, time stopped for one family. What unfolded in just minutes would leave 4 children with memories no child should ever carry, and a future forever changed. Her name was Jerri Mains. Jerri was 44 years old, a mother of 4, a woman who had been trying, desperately, to protect herself and her children. Just days earlier, on Christmas Day, she had taken a step that required courage. She filed for a protective order against her husband, Cecil Mains. It was her way of saying enough. Her way of trying to keep her family safe. But that order had not yet been served. 3 days later, everything collapsed. Just before 2:30 in the afternoon, an argument erupted at the family's home on Meadow Bend Lane. What happened next unfolded rapidly, and in full view of the children. According to investigators, gunfire rang out inside the house. Then outside. Then in the driveway. Jerri was shot twice. Chaos followed. As fear filled the home, Jerri's children, ages 19, 17, 14, and 10, scattered in terror. Some ran. Some hid. All of them were afraid. And in that moment they did the only thing they could do. They called for help. Multiple emergency calls came in, made by Jerri's own children. Their voices were shaking. Their words rushed. One of her sons told dispatchers that his father had shot his mother. Once inside the house and again outside. Another child whispered while hiding, begging for help to come quickly. One sentence from those calls stands out, heavy, heartbreaking, and impossible to forget. My mom had a restraining order against him. Police arrived to find Jerri lying in the driveway, critically injured. She was rushed to the hospital, still alive, still fighting. But despite every effort, she did not survive her injuries. By then, Cecil Mains had already fled the scene in his pickup truck. A search began almost immediately. Not long after, officers located the vehicle and conducted a traffic stop. Cecil was taken into custody without resistance. He was later charged with murder and additional felony counts. But no arrest could undo what had already happened. Jerri's children lost their mother in the most traumatic way imaginable, witnessing violence where love should have been, hearing fear where laughter once lived, making emergency calls no child should ever have to make. This is not just a crime story. It is the story of a woman who asked for protection, a system that moved too slowly, and 4 children whose lives were forever altered in a single afternoon. And as this case moves through the courts, one question continues to linger. What happens when help comes too late? Before the sirens. Before the frantic phone calls. Before a quiet driveway became the last place a mother would be seen alive. There was a long stretch of time where Jerri Mains was simply trying to live. Jerri was 44 years old, a mother of 4. Her life revolved around her children, their schedules, their meals, their safety, their futures. To the outside world, she was doing what millions of parents do every day, holding things together one responsibility at a time. But inside her home, things were not calm. By the end of 2025, Jerri's marriage to Cecil Mains, 47, had reached a breaking point. Whatever once existed between them had been replaced by fear and instability. The details that later surfaced painted a picture not of a sudden explosion, but of tension that had been building, quietly, steadily, and dangerously. Jerri knew something was wrong. More importantly, she knew her children were at risk. That understanding didn't come from one moment. It came from a pattern, an accumulation of warning signs that made her realize she could no longer wait and hope things would improve on their own. So on Christmas Day, while most families were celebrating, Jerri made a difficult decision. She went to court. On December 25, Jerri filed for a protective order against her husband. It was not a move made lightly. Protective orders are often a last resort, an admission that the person closest to you is also the one you need protection from. In her filing, Jerri asked for distance, for safety, for legal boundaries that could shield her and her children from harm. But the timing worked against her. Because it was a holiday, the courthouse was closed. The order was approved, but it was not served immediately. The paperwork sat in limbo, waiting for the system to resume its normal pace. For Jerri, that delay mattered more than anyone realized. In the days that followed Christmas, life continued in an uneasy state. There was no sense of relief yet, no clear separation, no enforcement, no visible barrier between fear and safety. The house remained occupied. The tension remained unresolved. And the children felt it. At ages 19, 17, 14, and 10, they were old enough to sense when something wasn't right, even if they couldn't fully understand it. Homes have a way of absorbing stress. Voices change, silence lingers longer, ordinary moments feel heavier. Jerri tried to manage it all. Like many parents in difficult situations, she carried the weight quietly, prioritizing her children while navigating uncertainty herself. She had taken the right step, but she was still waiting for it to take effect. 3 days passed. Then came Sunday, December 28th. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary afternoon in a residential Indianapolis neighborhood. No alarms. No warnings. Just another quiet stretch of daylight. Inside the Mains home, however, emotions reached a tipping point. What exactly was said during the argument that day has not been fully detailed publicly. What is known is that the situation escalated rapidly and fatally. According to investigators, a confrontation occurred between Jerri and Cecil. The tension that had been simmering finally boiled over. And this time there was a weapon. What happened next did not unfold behind closed doors, away from witnesses. It happened in front of the children, the very people Jerri had been trying to protect. Shots were fired inside the house. Then outside. Then in the driveway. The violence was not a single moment. It moved through the home, following Jerri as she tried to escape. For the children, time fractured. Fear took over. Instinct replaced reason. Some ran. Some hid. Some grabbed their phones with shaking hands. They called for help. Multiple emergency calls came in, all telling the same story through different voices. Their mother had been shot. Their father was responsible. They were terrified. One child explained that the shooting happened both inside the house and outside. Another whispered while hiding, afraid to be seen. One mentioned something critical. Something that revealed just how close this tragedy had come to being prevented. Their mother had a restraining order. By the time police arrived, Jerri was lying in the driveway, gravely wounded. She was still alive when first responders reached her. There was still hope, however fragile. She was rushed to the hospital. Her children were left behind, standing in shock, surrounded by flashing lights, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Cecil Mains had already fled the scene. He drove away, leaving behind not only a crime scene, but 4 children whose lives had just been violently split in two. Within a short time, law enforcement located his vehicle and took him into custody without further incident. The chaos stopped, but the damage had already been done. Jerri did not survive her injuries. The woman who had tried to do everything right, the woman who had filed for protection, who had tried to shield her children, who had acted before it was too late, was gone. And her children were left to carry the weight of that afternoon. A mother recognizing danger. A legal system slowed by timing. A family living in the space between fear and hope. Because what happened on December 28th did not begin that day. It began earlier, quietly, invisibly, when warning signs appeared, when help was requested, and when time became the one thing Jerri Mains did not have enough of. Next, we'll examine the exact moments that followed, the emergency response, the arrest, and how the legal process began for a case that has left a community asking one haunting question. What could have changed the outcome? R8 Woods XC. When the flashing lights finally faded and the sirens grew distant, the tragedy of Jerri Mains did not settle into silence. Instead, it began to unfold. What followed the shooting was a slow and painful revelation, one where every detail mattered, every moment was examined, and every unanswered question demanded attention. For investigators, it was about building a case. For Jerri's children, it was about surviving the reality they had just witnessed. And for everyone connected to her, it became a reckoning. In the immediate aftermath, detectives secured the home on Meadow Bend Lane. What had once been a family space was now treated as evidence. Every room was documented. Every mark told part of the story. Investigators traced the path of the violence, from inside the house to outside and finally to the driveway. The physical evidence aligned with what the children had described in their emergency calls. This was not a single moment. It was a progression, a confrontation, an attempt to escape, and a final, irreversible act. Meanwhile, Cecil Mains was already in custody. After leaving the scene, he was located driving his pickup truck and stopped by law enforcement. There was no resistance, no dramatic exchange. He was taken in quietly, an arrest that stood in sharp contrast to the chaos left behind. As detectives began piecing together the timeline, the voices of Jerri's children became central to the investigation. Their statements were not polished or rehearsed. They were emotional, fragmented, and raw, spoken in fear and confusion. Yet together they formed a clear picture. They described hearing shots inside the house. They described their mother running. They described shots fired again outside. One detail, repeated more than once, shifted the weight of the case. Jerri had filed for a protective order. This revelation reframed everything. Investigators learned that Jerri had gone to court on Christmas Day. She had asked for legal protection against her husband. She had taken the step many are advised to take when they believe harm is possible. The order had been approved, but it had not yet been served. In legal terms, that meant the protection she sought existed only on paper. There was no physical enforcement, no immediate boundary, no mechanism to stop what would happen days later. For detectives and prosecutors, this was critical context. It established that Jerri recognized a threat and acted on it. This was not an unforeseen event, it was a feared one. As the investigation deepened, prosecutors moved forward with formal charges. Cecil Mains was charged with murder and additional felony counts connected to the events of that afternoon. Each charge reflected a different layer of what investigators believed had occurred. Not just harm inflicted, but danger posed to others. Not just loss but escalation. Yet no charge could capture the full emotional cost. For Jerri's children, the world they knew had collapsed. They were interviewed, supported, and protected as best as possible, but the process itself was heavy. Recounting what they saw meant reliving it. Every question reopened wounds that had barely begun to form. The oldest child, at 19, suddenly found himself facing adulthood under unimaginable circumstances. Responsibility arrived without warning. Grief mixed with obligation. The younger children struggled in different ways. Fear replaced routine. Familiar spaces no longer felt safe. Nighttime brought memories that daylight couldn't erase. Their mother, the person who anchored their lives, was gone. Beyond the immediate family, the shock rippled outward. Neighbors tried to reconcile the violence with the normalcy they believed surrounded them. Friends of Jerri spoke about her strength, her devotion to her children, and her determination to protect them. Many shared the same painful realization: she had tried to prevent this. As more details surfaced, the case became about more than a single act. It became about patterns, warnings, and timing. Investigators examined the days leading up to the shooting. They looked at previous conflicts, emotional volatility, and the strain within the household. They analyzed whether the confrontation that day had been sudden, or whether it was the final breaking point in a long struggle. What emerged was not an excuse but a context. And within that context, one truth remained unshaken: nothing justified what happened. No argument, no emotion, no circumstance. The legal process moved forward methodically. Court appearances, filings, hearings. Each step was necessary but slow. For the family left behind, time felt distorted, both frozen and rushing forward at once. Jerri's children now lived between two realities: the private grief of losing their mother, and the public process of a criminal case that would follow them for years. At the same time, Jerri's story began to resonate beyond her immediate circle. It raised difficult questions about protection, response time, and what happens when someone asks for help and the system cannot move fast enough. Her life, and her death, became a reminder that danger does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it lingers, builds, and waits. Act 2 is where the story shifts, from shock to understanding, from chaos to clarity, from loss to accountability. It is where hidden tensions come into focus, where motives are examined, and where the consequences of delay are fully revealed. And as the case moves toward the courtroom, one truth becomes unavoidable. The tragedy of Jerri Mains did not begin in the driveway. It began long before, when fear was recognized, help was requested, and time quietly ran out. The courtroom is quieter than the house on Meadowbend Lane ever was that afternoon. No sirens. No shouting. No frantic phone calls. Just polished wood, fixed seats, and a process designed to measure truth one step at a time. This is where the story of Jerri Mains reaches its most unavoidable moment, not because it ends here but because everything must now be faced. For the legal system, this phase is called resolution. For Jerri's children, it is something else entirely. It is the moment when grief collides with permanence. Cecil Mains stands accused of murder and additional felony charges connected to the events of December 28. The allegations are clear. The timeline has been laid out. The evidence, physical, testimonial, and circumstantial, has been assembled piece by piece. But in the courtroom, the focus is no longer on how quickly events unfolded. It is on what they mean. Prosecutors begin by doing what the law requires, presenting facts. They outline the sequence investigators reconstructed: the confrontation, the gunfire inside the house, the pursuit outside, the final shots in the driveway. They explain how Jerri was critically injured, how she was rushed to the hospital, and how she did not survive. They speak of the emergency calls made by the children, of the fear in their voices, of the consistency between those calls and the physical evidence. They introduce the protective order, filed days earlier. Proved, but not yet served. That detail lingers in the air longer than most. It is not introduced for emotion. It is introduced for context, for intent, for understanding the full scope of what preceded the tragedy. The defense listens, responds within the boundaries of law, raises questions where questions are allowed. This is how the system works: structured, measured, deliberate. But no legal argument can erase what the children saw. For Jerri's family, attending court is not about watching justice unfold in real time. It is about endurance, sitting through descriptions of the worst day of their lives, hearing their mother's name spoken alongside words no child ever wants associated with a parent. Every mention reopens the wound. The emotional toll is visible in quiet ways, in long pauses, in steady breathing, in hands clenched tightly together. These are not reactions for cameras or headlines. They are the human cost of violence playing out in slow motion. As the case progresses, one thing becomes increasingly clear. This is not a mystery waiting to be solved. It is a tragedy waiting to be acknowledged. The legal process does what it can. Charges are upheld. Proceedings continue. Accountability is pursued through the framework available. But justice in cases like this is never complete. Because justice cannot give 4 children their mother back. Outside the courtroom, life continues, but it does not return to normal. Jerri's children now navigate a world without her guidance. The oldest carries responsibilities that arrived too soon. The younger ones carry memories they are too young to fully process. Holidays come and go. Birthdays pass. Milestones arrive with an absence that is always felt. Their home no longer feels the same. Some rooms remain untouched longer than expected. Certain sounds trigger memories. Certain silences feel louder than noise ever did. Grief is not a single emotion. It is a cycle. Some days are manageable. Others are overwhelming. Support comes from extended family, counselors, community members. But even support has limits. No one else can carry the exact weight they bear. For those who knew Jerri, remembrance becomes its own form of reckoning. Friends speak of her protectiveness, her determination, her love for her children. They remember how she tried to do the right thing, how she sought help instead of remaining silent. Many struggle with the same thought: what if the timing had been different? It is a question without an answer. And yet, Jerri's story does not end in loss alone. In the aftermath, her name becomes part of a larger conversation. One about awareness, urgency, and the gaps that exist when systems move slower than danger. Her life forces reflection. It challenges assumptions that warning signs are always obvious, or that help always arrives in time. It underscores the reality that taking the right steps does not always guarantee protection, but taking no steps guarantees vulnerability. For viewers watching this story unfold, the emotional reckoning is unavoidable. This is not about fear. It is about recognition. Recognizing how quickly everyday life can change. Recognizing the courage it takes to ask for help. Recognizing the responsibility we all share to take signs seriously, whether they come from friends, family, or neighbors. The climax of this story is not the moment of violence. It is the moment afterward, when the truth is laid bare, when accountability is demanded, and when the full weight of what was lost becomes clear. And the resolution is not a verdict alone. It is the understanding that behind every headline is a family learning how to breathe again. Jerri Mains was not just a victim. She was a mother, a protector, a woman who tried to shield her children from harm. Her legacy lives on in the lives she shaped, and in the lessons her story leaves behind. As this chapter closes, we are left with questions that deserve attention, not avoidance. What can be done when someone asks for protection? How do we respond to warning signs before they escalate? And how do we ensure that stories like Jerri's are not repeated? If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or recognize something familiar, do not let that moment pass unnoticed. Share this video so more people understand the realities behind situations like this. Subscribe for deeper, responsible storytelling that centers truth and humanity. And leave a comment, not with judgment but with reflection. What stood out to you? What conversations does this story open? Because awareness is not passive. And remembering Jerri Mains means ensuring her story matters, not just today but long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for watching Abby True Crime Stories.